Hi, welcome back to the course of Biblical Theology and Worldview of Why We Work. We're in chapter 2, where we're going to talk about culture. To fully benefit from this course, it is imperative that we understand the following. First, what is culture? Second, what is the degree to which worldview embedded within the core of culture affects our beliefs and behaviors in relation to work, money, and business? Section A. Okay, so what is meant by culture? I would say what most people mean by culture is not culture. Many years ago, a Southern California man on his way to New York City complained to me that Los Angeles has no culture. Of course, what he meant by culture was pop or popular culture, consisting of art, theater, music, etc. What anthropologists mean by culture isn't that. That is, to anthropologists, culture is something entirely different. Margaret Mead, one of the pioneer anthropologists, defined culture as, quote, the systematic body of learned behavior which is transmitted from parents to children, end of quote. The systematic body of learned behavior which is transmitted from parents to their children. Anthropologist Paul Heber, who had a long tenure at Fuller Theological Seminary, stated, quote, culture is the integrated system of learned patterns of behavior, ideas, and products that is characteristic of a society. A culture is the integrated system of learned patterns of behavior, ideas, and products that is characteristic of a society. Both definitions, though differently worded, agree that culture is totality, the system of body, according to Mead, the integrated system, according to Heber, of how people learn to behave and think. Culture is the totality of how people learn to behave and think. Inevitably, it becomes a mold, a pattern. It sure doesn't sound very glamorous, right? Whereas pop culture of operas and concerts sure does. But while we can live without operas, we cannot live without culture. In fact, what water is to fish is what culture is to humans. As for how culture developed, diverse cultural patterns among different tribes, peoples, or nations are adaptive to the environment and culturally selected, not biologically transmitted, according to Mead. Adaptive to environment, but not biologically transmitted. Culture, no doubt, is a major contributor to how we behave and think, but we need to be careful here lest we fall for cultural relativism. The fact is that culture over biology has in time led to a postmodern belief that sex is a biological construction, man-made, in which a man can become a woman by simply saying that that's how he feels inside. The 23rd chromosome that determines our sex is not man-made. XX for female and XY for male. Obviously, there's more to say on this, but not today. So, how much are we affected by culture? Although we cannot readily see, feel, or touch culture, humans are not able to live without culture, much the same way fish are not able to live without water. Subsequently, being surrounded by cultural pattern or system, while we are not always aware of its shaping influences that mold our ideas and behaviors, we are being constantly and undeniably acculturated to that pattern or system, however unconsciously. Section B, the main objective of a cultural system. A cultural system's main objective is to meet daily needs arising from the four areas of human needs. The first need is the physical: food, clothes, shelter, reproduction, etc. This need is satisfied by employment, access to goods and services, functioning infrastructure, water, electricity, gas, and marriage. Then there's the social need. Education on the one hand, feeling secure and safe on the other. This need is satisfied by good school, police protection, and better lighting. The third need is psychological. This has to do with having a sense of belonging and acceptance. This need is satisfied by inclusion in a community along with friendship, love, etc. The fourth and final need is spiritual, having meaning and purpose with positive hopes of an afterlife. In fact, I cannot think of any religion that says nothing about what may happen after we die. This spiritual need is satisfied by worshiping a deity, having a sacred book, and attending a church, synagogue, or mosque. Now, before proceeding, consider these two questions for discussion if you are in a group or for your reflection if you are studying alone. Which one of these four needs is not being adequately met in the modern world, in your opinion? What is one need that you feel is not satisfactorily being met in your life? That's kind of a personal question. Again, pause the video right now and jot down your response in a notebook or smartphone, okay? Now in section C, we now consider reasons for cultural differences. Obviously, no two cultures are alike, even in the same country. Why? Due mainly to variations in location, climate, and available resources, natural resources, people develop different ways of meeting these basic needs. As a result, even their physical appearance may vary as well. For instance, having lived and traveled widely in Mexico, I have noticed that northern Mexicans are taller, bigger, and lighter in complexion than southern Mexicans. One reason behind the physical differences is their diet. The northerners, being close to the US and thus having access to more factory jobs, eat better, but not necessarily healthier, than those who live in Mexico's poorer southern states. For instance, the northerners consume far more meat than the southerners. Now, what began as an adaptation to a given environment at the individual level, when shared and imitated by others in the same group, becomes a cultural pattern or system. Subsequently, distinctive cultural patterns emerge that set one group apart from another. For instance, I could tell apart the men of Tarahumara Indians who live in the Sierra Mountains of Mexico by what they commonly wear, what looks like skimpy running shorts. Known as the running tribe, the shorts that expose their legs accommodate their penchant for running to get to places in the rugged mountains. Another example is different styles of structure that people build as their permanent shelters. The Eskimos of Alaska, surrounded by abundant snow and ice and aided by frigid climate weather, build an igloo for shelter. It would neither make sense nor be possible to build an adobe structure. Instead, adobe houses are found in dry climates where bricks made from earth dry very, very quickly. As for the nomads in Central Asia, neither structure is feasible or possible since they move from place to place. So they live in a yurt, a portable round tent covered with skin and felt. Evidently, the patriarch lived like the nomads, for, quote, Abraham lived in tents as did Isaac and Jacob, end of quote, Hebrew 11:9. What is noteworthy is that the Hebrew writer interprets the nomadic lifestyle spiritually. He sees the nomadicity, likely born of ecological necessity, as the rejection of the world, that is, its lifestyle values on the one hand, and, quote, longing for a better country, a heavenly one, end of quote, Hebrews 11:16 on the other. This spiritual outlook is very useful, as seen later in this course, when discussing the subject of why we work and how we should approach it, particularly when we work in a secular environment. Now to section D. Reciprocal relationships between cultures and individuals. It has been said that culture affects us greatly. How? Well, as a pattern, it affects us the way the road system affects how we drive. In places like Hong Kong and Malaysia, drivers sit on the right side while driving on the left side of the road. It's of course opposite in the United States, where drivers sit on the left side while driving on the right side of the road. Obviously, Americans driving in Hong Kong would be adversely affected by the road system there. In the same way, a Western couple sharing a yurt with a Mongolian family would be shocked by confined personal space and lack of privacy, something very important to Western people. This situation would certainly affect the conjugal relationships in a yurt with other Mongolian families. At the same time, since collective action by a group of individuals is responsible for setting cultural patterns, culture can change if enough individuals amend their previous ways of meeting their basic needs. In speaking of changes in culture, obviously, the advancement in technology plays a critical role in the modern era. Such cultural changes may be morally neutral, but economically skewed. For instance, while there's nothing morally wrong with going from in-person shopping to online shopping to purchase clothes and other necessities, it will in time lead to the closure of many malls. Of course, many have already. Furthermore, these changes are not always morally neutral either. For instance, the proliferation of porn viewing is a direct result of its accessibility in cyberspace, which beats having to drive to an obscure theater to view it, like in the olden days. The most relevant question to this course is how the advancement in technology, which has elevated working at home as the most desired option, affects work ethics on the one hand and productivity on the other. Section E, changes in culture. Cultural change has always been slow in the making since culture presses people who are social beings with a fundamental need to belong, to conform to its pattern to gain social acceptance, thereby meeting their psychological needs. In other words, no one is born to be a countercultural crusader. This is why God's word says in Romans 12:2, quote, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world," end of a quote. Why? Because conforming to the world's pattern for acceptance is our default position. Of course, culture does change unless you are Amish people, many of whom are still trying to live according to the ways of their ancestors dating back to the 17th century in two major ways: surface and deep level changes. Surface and the deep level changes. Let me first speak on surface level cultural changes. In the 21st century, technological advances made in communication and transportation have drastically affected the breadth and speed of cultural changes with respect to meeting the needs in the four areas of basic need. For instance, as insinuated earlier, the internet has created an entirely new way of generating income, along with making the daily commute to the office unnecessary for some. Of course, Facebook has revolutionized how we make friends, socialize, even how we view ourselves, contingent upon how many people like our posts and photos. But these are mainly external changes, that is, cultural changes visible on the surface. Despite what appears to be drastic cultural changes, not much may have changed at a deeper level where worldview functions. I will explain that later, of course. For example, imagine a telemarketer who used to commute to the office every day to make calls to potential clients. After getting fired for unethical sales practices, he now works at home selling items online through eBay. While his way of meeting physical needs has certainly changed, that does not guarantee that his unethical way has changed also. For that to happen, he needs to undergo deeper changes from within. In speaking of deeper level changes, we read earlier in Romans 12:2, quote, do not conform to the pattern of this world, end of the quote. The rest of that verse says, quote, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, end of the quote. The renewing of the mind occurs at the deeper level where worldview resides. Apart from changes occurring at the deeper level of our mind, substantial outward changes do not occur. Whatever change that may occur on the outside is nothing more than behavioral modification. For instance, it would be akin to going from smoking tobacco to vaping in an effort to relieve stress. It's going from betting on horses to reckless day trading. Behavioral modifications, nothing more. As long as there's no substantial change made at the worldview level, the collective actions of individuals do not change, and as a result, culture remains the same despite impressive and constant changes, technological in particular, on the surface. So then, what is a worldview? We will cover that in chapter 3. Now, consider these questions for our discussion. 1. In what sense does the herd mentality keep culture from transforming? Since this mentality refers to people who are influenced by peers to adopt their thoughts and behaviors, it tends to keep the status quo, thereby not allowing any changes. That's what I think. What do you say? 2. Share one area of your life, whether home or at work, that the surrounding culture has had negative effects in your life. Why do you think it happened? Take out your notebook and jot down your thoughts. Also, you will find homework questions here as well. Give good and thoughtful answers. Jot them down in your notebook. Thank you.